This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Sins of the Father, bonus episode 3. When we left off in part 15, it was a whole lot going on. While True may have had her hands full trying to rescue Donovan, her life and her job just got even more complicated. The day before was a long day. She had an even longer night, and the current day started off with early morning phone calls with Mom Brenda and the Queen Mother that left her mind spinning, and she couldn't even turn to Big Wood and share with him all of the thoughts that were running through her mind, because they'd gotten into it again the night before. He'd shown up to the safe house with questions. As soon as he came in the door and said, "Let me holler at you for a minute, little mama," True knew it was going to be some BS. When she wrapped up her conversation with Maribel, and Maribel stepped out of the room so that she could talk to Big Wood, he then said, "So instead of admitting that I was right about them little niggas, you take 6 of them out?" True said, "You weren't right about them." "Well, you were, but that was never the issue. And why do you even know anything about how I chose to handle that situation?" Big Wood said, "Come on now. You wanted me to know. You wanted everybody to know." True said, "And what's the issue? They got kids too that I should have been worried about?" Big Wood asked, "Do they? Do you even know? Do you even know their names? Where they from? How long they been with the organization?" True said, "I'm not here to make friends. I don't give a damn about their history or what's going on in their personal lives. We are all here to do a job. And if they were focused on that instead of on playing with me, they'd still be alive." Big Wood said, "I see." True said, "Do you? Because I feel like you judging me. You expecting me to do things the way you would do them. And that's not an expectation that's reasonable or fair. I'm a woman in a man's world playing a man's game. And I need these niggas to know that I'm more than just a pretty face, that I didn't screw my way into this position, and that I got the balls to do what needs to be done." Big Wood said, "Understood." True said, "What do you want from me, Wood?" Big Wood said, "I just want to know you still got a hurt in your chest, that you weighing your options and counting the costs. I need to know that your role as the right hand is still a job, and it hasn't become your identity." When True didn't respond, Big Wood said, "Come here, little mama." True said, "Not here, Wood." Wood said, "I need to be able to see your heart, no matter where we are. You got to be able to take your mask off. You got to be able to put your gangster down. Come here, little mama. It's just me and you." When True looked at the door, Big Wood said, "Don't do that. Don't break your own heart." When True closed her eyes and took a deep breath, Big Wood closed the distance, wrapped her in his arms, kissed her on the forehead, and said, "You still have so much to learn about this job, about who you are, about what love looks like. Love isn't something you find. It's something you choose. And you don't choose it instead of everything else. You choose it with everything else. It makes everything else better. It makes you better. And when you choose it, really choose it, it changes how you make decisions, how you move, how you see life, and how you handle people. Don't give up on love, True. Keep choosing it. You'll know when you're ready. And so will I. But you're not ready yet." And then Big Wood started walking towards the door. Right before he got to it, True said, "Wood, I love you." Wood turned around and said, "I know. I love you too. You good? I got you, little mama." And True breathed a sigh of relief, because she thought Big Wood had just broke up with her. Hearing that, she closed the distance, reached up, grabbed her man, pulled him down to her, and gave him a long kiss. Big Wood said, "Too late. Maybe next time." And True's flabbers were gasted. She didn't know what kind of game Big Wood was playing, if he was trying to humble her or exert some power over her, dim her light, or what. But his little speech had gotten to her. So she wanted to show him that she was in fact choosing love. But the way that little exchange ended had her a little off kilter. And the following morning, her conversation with the Queen Mother was literally the icing on the humility cake, because that conversation illuminated Big Wood's point. And Big Wood's point illuminated the conversation with the Queen Mother. The right commitment kept leaders grounded. Love kept them balanced. And True needed one of the 3 musketeers to run all this by, since Stephanie had left the safe house and went back to the St. James estate the night before to meet Corey in the guest house that Catherine had prepared for them. True went to find Rennie. Rennie had stayed at the safe house the night before, too. Imagine True's surprise when she stormed into the bedroom that Rennie was staying in and found her in bed, not alone. True said, "Ooh, well, excuse the hell out of me." And Rennie said, "Damn, girl, you don't knock." And when Stack said, "Boss, if you give me a minute to throw something on, I'll give y'all the room," Rennie said, "No, you can go back to your room, and I'll meet you there in 5 minutes." Then True said, "No, this nigga can get up and go now." And Rennie said, "Sorry, Stacks." Then Stacks stood up, booty butt naked, put his boxer briefs on in front of True, threw his slacks on and his wife beater, grabbed his shirt, socks, and shoes, and squeezed between True and the door jamb. And Rennie said, "See you later, Stacks." Then True stepped inside the room, closed the door, and said, "Rennie." Rennie said, "What? I'm single." And True said, "That's my general." And Rennie said, "Did you see the third leg on that man? Girl, you right. He a damn general." True said, "So I take it that your little 3-day trip with Phil didn't improve on his initial performance?" Rennie said, "He tried, but he just didn't do it for me." True said, "Well, you gonna have to explain how we got here." Rennie said, "Girl, let me tell you. But we gotta get Stephanie on the phone so that way I ain't gotta tell the story but once." True said, "Girl, you know what time it is?" Rennie said, "Yeah, you didn't care what time it was when you came busting up in my room? You call her, because if I call, she not gonna answer." So True called Stephanie, and she answered. Stephanie said, "This better be important, girl. I was up all night getting my back blown out. What do you want?" Rennie said, "Well, okay then, best friend. You go, girl." Stephanie said, "Oh, God. What did you do, Rennie?" Rennie said, "Well, damn, you ain't got to say it like that. If you laying next to CT, tell him we said good morning. And get the hell out the bed, friend. Because we got ish to do." Stephanie said, "Babe." Rennie said, "Good morning." CT said, "Oh, God, Rennie. What did you do?" True and Stephanie just bust out laughing. Rennie said, "Damn, what y'all be telling him about?" Then Rennie explained how her and Sax ended up in bed together. She said, "So I left Phil in LA. Apparently, his idea of a good time is sightseeing, shopping trips, intermittent sex, and room service. And I know that works for some broads, but I'm not one of them. And I get how he may have thought that those would be things that I would like. I mean, I stay fresh to death. Fly as fits, hair stay slayed, makeup on point, nails and toes done. But I ain't been in a store to shop for nothing since we was working undercover in Venezuela. I'm a spoiled brat. Anybody who knows me knows." Stephanie said, "I would think all the time he spent talking to Donovan, he would have got the scoop." Rennie said, "That's what I was thinking. Now y'all know Donovan. He want me out of his hair. So I'm sure he tried to give that man the play. The only thing that I can think is maybe he didn't believe him. Or maybe he thought he could apply his past experiences with other women to me. But he failed miserably. I thought we were on the same page before we left the yacht. But I had a better time with Dr. Indugu when I drugged his wine back in college. And he was old and inebriated. It don't make no sense for no man to be that fine, not have enough boat, and then have the audacity to have lackluster motion in the ocean." Stephanie was laughing uncontrollably. And True asked, "So how did the man get left in LA? And what on earth does that have to do with you ending up in the bed with Stacks?" Rennie said, "I told him I had something to do and I'd be right back. Then I drove to the airport and left." Stephanie said, "What?" Rennie said, I had to shake him. I just couldn't do it no more. And I was done explaining myself. He should have knew the writing was on the wall when I had him stop at a store so I could get a dildo." True said, "You did what?" Rennie said, "You heard me. And that was on day 2. Stephanie said, "Did I hear right? Did she end up screwing one of my generals?" Rennie said, "And it was good. So when we walked into the safe house last night, I saw him checking me out. And when you was in there talking to Big Wood, and Stephanie got out of here like a bat out of hell." And then Rennie told them all about her conversation with Stacks. Rennie said, "Let me ask you something. How well do you know Donovan?" Stacks said, "Not well. I know him." Rennie asked, "You know a soldier named Phil?" Stacks said, "I can't say that I do. Why?" Rennie said, Just wondering. You got a girlfriend?" Then Stacks chuckled and said, "Nah, I'm a single man. And you?" Rennie said, "I'm available. And the thing is, I got a lot of pent-up frustration that I need to get out. Now, I plan to take some of it out on Jeff tomorrow. But I don't know if that's going to scratch my itch. You good at scratching?" Stacks said, "Are we talking about..." Rennie said, "Sex. We're talking about sex." Stacks said, "I ain't never had no complaints, but You know, this conversation is pretty unorthodox. Rennie said, yeah, I know. Do you know who I am? Stack said, if I understand correctly, you're the Baptiste family chemist. Rennie asked, and what exactly does that mean in the big scheme of things? I'm just trying to understand how I'm seen in this world. Stack said, you're seen as the best friend of the bosses and one of the daughters of the Baptiste family's head. That's more than enough. Nobody really cares about what you do for the family. Rennie said, does that make me off limits or something? Stack said, if you want to be. Rennie said, I don't want to be. Rennie turned to one of the soldiers and said, when your boss comes out of there, tell her I went to bed. I was tired. I'll see her in the morning. Then she turned back to Stacks and said, can you show me which room I'm staying in for the night? And Stacks said, right this way. And Rennie said, and can you help me get comfortable? And Stacks said, I don't do comfortable. I do real uncomfortable. And Rennie said, don't threaten me with a good time. Stephanie and True fell out laughing. True said, so you slutted out my general? Really, Rennie? Rennie said, look who's talking. You wouldn't give us 5 minutes for the man to get decent and leave the room. You seen this man in all his glory. True said, that's because I needed to make sure he knew I was unfazed. Rennie said, well, I'm not. That man put his thing down, flipped it, and reversed it. I think I'm in love. Stephanie said, oh, dear God. Goodbye, Rennie. I gotta go. True said, wait, Steph. Tell CT I need to talk to him about something. Stephanie said, you and Woods still ain't worked things out? True. Not wanting Stephanie to figure out that she needed to talk to him about her, said, nope, we sure haven't. And Rennie raised one eyebrow because she knew True was up to something. Meanwhile, at the St. James estate, Catherine had a time last night, and after only a few hours of sleep, she was woken up to a warm tongue and soft lips in her nether regions. When everyone was gone, Amir returned to the estate, and after a very brief discussion where Amir confessed his love for Catherine, and Catherine made it painfully clear that after nearly 40 years of marriage and several years of friendship with Amir, she was not at all interested in a relationship. And while he'd made her laugh and made her smile and pleasured her orally a time or two, the most she was willing to commit to was one night without limits, and no questions asked, no strings attached, and no demands. Amir, who was 20 years her junior, gave her everything she'd been missing. Catherine had ended her intimate relationship with her husband 20 years earlier when she'd learned of Annabelle's third pregnancy. And while she didn't know the details of the first and second pregnancy until earlier in the evening when Annabelle confessed all to her children, she was well aware of Annabelle's plot and the trap that she'd laid for Nigel that third time, thanks to Amir. Her friendship with Amir had only been intimate for a few years, which was precisely why she was looking at him sideways when her husband came up dead. At the same time, she didn't find it hard to believe that Amir was innocent as it pertained to Nigel's demise, because in the years of their secret friendship, he'd never even tried to take it all away. She hadn't fooled herself. Her assumption was that Amir felt sorry for her, that he simply had a warm spot for her, and that he'd been there for her solely to cheer her up, lift her spirits, make her feel good. It had never occurred to her that Amir had any real feelings for her, and the last thing she wanted to be was a damn fool like her husband, taken advantage of and used by a younger man. So until that night, she'd made it a point to keep Amir somewhat at arm's length, using him for the information that she could get from him, keeping him close and guarding her heart. And since Amir never asked for more than she was willing to give, she'd assumed that her assessment of him and their friendship was correct. But that night, when they'd taken things to the next level, Amir took advantage of the opportunity, and he didn't screw Catherine. He made love to Catherine all night long. And Catherine had no idea how she would hold herself to the words that she'd spoken the night before, especially considering that she was still going to have to be around Amir. In order for her plan to work, he was going to have to continue in his role as right hand, first for her, and then later for Sincere. Catherine suspected that Amir was putting it down the way he was because he expected that the 50-something-year-old Catherine would be so turned out she wouldn't be able to turn him away. She figured that he kissed and licked and stroked her down to her soul in an effort to get her wide open. But Catherine wasn't new to this. She was true to this. She was married to a man who was juggling 7 women all of whom were significantly younger than him, and not one of them was cashing out at a level that would justify their willingness to be readily available to her 60-something-year-old husband for years at a time. If Nigel was nothing else, he was good in bed. He had those young broads' noses wide open. Truth be told, Catherine had once been one of them young broads with her nose wide open. Nigel was her first, and almost 10 years her senior. And she'd heard enough horror stories to know that taking another lover was going to be hit or miss. So when she'd ended her intimate relationship with her husband, she'd chosen not to even go that route. Yes, she'd allowed Amir to pleasure her a time or two. But Nigel was a hard act to follow, and she'd proven just how determined and controlled a woman she was. Because 20 years is a long time to go without sexual healing. When she woke up to Amir giving her oral pleasure, the only thing that she could think in her head was, oh, I'm going to get that thing one more time for the road. Because when he'd cracked the seal on that jar the night before, Catherine had found that it was well worth the wait. Amir had pulled out all the stops, baby. He'd put her in a warm bubble bath, washed her from head to toe, rubbed her down in body oil, and caressed every part of her body with his lips that his hands had touched. By the time he finally made it to her middle, Catherine was about to lose her mind. When he got there, he took his slow, sweet time. Now, Catherine may have chosen to go without, but she was still very much so a sexual being. So as she responded to the stimuli, her kitty cat did too. And Amir had that kitty cat purring. And the two seemed to be well-matched lovers, because Amir was vocal and so was Catherine. While Catherine was moaning and groaning, Amir was telling Catherine all about his love for her, what he wanted to do to her, for her, and with her, how long he'd been waiting for that day, how good she smelled and tasted. And when she exploded, he sopped it all up, like a man having his first glass of water after being stranded in a dinghy on the ocean. And that just turned Catherine on even more. When he finally entered her temple for the first time, he worshipped. They made uninhibited love, without a barrier. Took everything in Amir, not to lose control, because the fit was tight. And Catherine didn't know if she was coming or going, because she was coming back to back. She had no idea how Amir had gotten all that inside, but every time he slowly slid it out and slowly slid it back in, she wanted to double check and make sure it was real, because she found it hard to believe that that was actually a body part and not a baseball bat. And what Catherine had no way of knowing is that every word Amir uttered from his mouth was genuine. In the same way she was having the experience of a lifetime, so was he. He was absolutely flabbergasted that this woman, nearly 20 years his senior, was not only that tight and that wet, but was throwing it back like that. He was calling her name, she was calling his. And the only reason that the session came to an end is because they both collapsed in exhaustion. That morning, in the middle of him having breakfast, Catherine's phone rang, and Amir said, "You promised me one night. My night ain't over. Don't answer that." Catherine said, "It might be important, Amir. I gotta answer it." And Amir said, "Hey, I'll leave here in a matter of hours. When I do, this chapter is closed, because you said so. Let me have this." Catherine laid back on the pillows, closed her eyes, and gave herself over to the feeling.